Hi everyone, Bob and Groz here talking, let me think, football. A little bit of football. It's odd that we're talking football, especially odd that we're talking Seahawks football, but what the heck, let's give it a shot.
All right, let's give it a whirl.
We've been talking, and then the storylines as they're kind of evolving after the season over is for the Seahawks. What positions are they going to look at for help when the draft upcoming and free agency in a couple of months, and we were talking about that a little bit too, but we talked about Matt Flynn on the show yesterday, and this is going to be one of the overriding ones. It's obviously, it's a backup quarterback situation, so it's not that vital necessarily, but the question of whether or not he stays as a backup, a guy who you got to be a starter, who probably wants to start, or you go back into the free agent market, try and make a deal for Matt Flynn, let him go, and bring back a free agent quarterback as opposed to a quarterback in the draft. We talked about it today. We looked at the list of free agent quarterbacks, and you can check it out on the podcast, because there's not a particularly good crop of rookies, we found out.
No.
And the veterans, well, there was one name that jumped out, and it was a familiar name.
Well, there are a few you could live with if Matt Flynn does move on. You saw Matt Moore on there. You saw a couple other names. I mean, there's names like,
Well, Joe Flacco, but I guess he wouldn't come as a backup.
I'm going to guess he won't be available, or happy to be a backup at that. But
especially if he wins the Super Bowl.
Right. I guess he'll be in demand somewhere. Tarvaris Jackson. Tarvaris Jackson is the name that was on that list. And again, we're talking as a backup, so there is no competition. I know Pete is all about compete and competition Wednesdays or whatever day he has it on, but it's
not for QB this year.
There is no competition. So the idea, and a lot of people had a really negative reaction when it was brought up earlier, and it's as a backup, and it's a guy that is mobile. We know that about him. He's familiar. We know that about him. He was popular in the locker room. We know that, and we know he's fairly amenable. He's a guy that went into Buffalo as a backup, and as far as I know, there were no issues with him being a backup. So I don't think it's a terrible option if Matt Flynn moves on to bring in a guy that has won some games for you. You don't want him to be your starter. You don't want him to be there for an extended period of time. I don't know how great I feel if Russell were knocked out for the season and this is your guy. I don't feel great. But if you're talking about, hey, he gets dinged up, he's out for a game, perhaps two, I feel okay with Tarvaris. I don't think it's a bad idea at all, and you probably get him for less than what I know you get him for less than what Matt Flynn is making now.
Maybe $1 million, probably 5 times less. And look, you can still do two-pronged with it too. You can still go after, and I kind of just as a fluke looked up the numbers for the guy who replaced RG3 at Baylor. He ran for 500 yards and threw 33 touchdowns. I mean, you're looking for a read option quarterback, a young guy to develop as your third stringer. You can do that as well, so you can go along that path. Plus, Tarvaris Jackson, torn tricep or whatever he had up there, pectoral muscle. He really proved himself to this team and to this coaching staff. I mean, I think they liked him here. He really had last year off, basically. I mean, he hardly dressed at all. So had a year to get healthy, to be healthy. As a backup quarterback, I think we thought when he was here, he was one of the best backups in the league.
That's what we said.
He would fit perfectly. You already know that he likes it here. You already know that he fits with your team and is a good teammate.
The issue was always him as a starter. That was always the issue. Any criticism that came from this show was always about him as a starter. You knew who he was prior to coming to Seattle, and it turned out he was still that same guy as a starter, which is very, very average. But we talked about, hey, as a backup, I like him. I'm fine with him in that role. We said that while he was here. He moves on to Buffalo. Now, perhaps, I don't know what the Seahawks' level of interest in him would be, but I don't think it's an absurd idea if he were willing and if they were willing, and if Matt Flynn says, listen, I don't want to be here, I want to be a starter somewhere else, I don't think that's a bad option.
If Flynn wants to go, TJ, come on back. Come on.